evening. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. Roger, thank you for making me feel so welcome here and for the extraordinary work you've done for 2 decades representing the children of our state with a special emphasis on Long Island. So I'm grateful for that. Grateful for all of you for coming here tonight. It's a joy to see you. And don't worry, I always feel welcome on Long Island, and I'm planning on coming back many, many, many more times. And to our president, our current president, Gary Slobin, I want to thank him for making me feel very welcome, as well as Rabbi Brian Stoller, our cantor, and the magnificent music of the choir. Thank you. It just lifts my heart to hear all of you sing together, especially representing so many denominations. Special shout out to partners like Tom DiNapoli and many others who've been acknowledged, but who represent you, and I work so closely in Albany. It is a huge point of pride for all of us that Dr. King did speak in this very setting 57 years ago. Most of you look too young to have even been alive back then, but I'll tell you what happened. He had about 1,200 people in the audience. And you may or not know this, but between 1957 and 1968, Dr. King traveled over 6 million miles doing over 25,000 events. But here is when he spoke about something that is still with us today. He spoke about the 2 Americas that he saw back in the time, one where people have the milk of prosperity and the honey of equality, and the other that is full of despair and injustice. He spoke of the fatigue of despair. Yet he was an optimistic man. He acknowledged the circumstances of our time back then, and I was young enough to remember the Civil Rights Movement. Growing up as a social justice Catholic, my parents were at all the marches. They were working hard to integrate our community and took me to the marches at the time. So I remember Dr. King's story. I read a book about him when I was in grade school. He was still alive. It's called Childhood of Famous Americans. I was about 3rd grade. And I was so fascinated by his story. I was intrigued about his message, but how he came to speak at such a young age with such conviction and belief in doing what's right at the right time. And when he was assassinated in April of 1968, my family told us children, I was young, but I remember it well. We gathered, my parents had tears in their eyes, and we talked about how can this be in this great country? How could this happen for someone who was so pure and so focused on fighting for nonviolence was struck down in an act of violence with an assassin's gun? I've never forgot that night with my family. We prayed for our country. It was a rough year historically, those of you who want to look up 1968. We lost Bobby Kennedy a couple months later, gunned down. We had riots protesting the loss of Dr. King. There was a lot of dissension at the Democratic Convention that year. The Vietnam protests were going on. A lot of people said, our country, how can it possibly heal? We're so divided. So when I think about today, I think about Dr. King's word. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it does bend toward justice. That's a very hopeful thought to me, that despite the times that he found himself in, that he still found that way to speak about hope. My friends, that's where we must find ourselves today. Yes, there can still be 2 Americas. Indeed, sometimes we feel like there's 2 New Yorks. And that's why I'm so focused on the communities that have been so oppressed, black and brown communities that are still not achieving the same sense of equality that Dr. King would have envisioned all those years ago. We've not achieved it yet. And we are all called to talk about that, to put a spotlight on that. But more than just talk, we have to do something about it. And that's why, as the governor of the state of New York, I'm so proud that I have the ability, with even a State of the State address a couple days ago, to think about Dr. King and what he would have wanted us to do to help lift up communities. And that's why we're focused on infant and maternal mortality. That's why we're focused on bringing good housing to people. That's why we're focused on education and quality health care to end those health care deserts and all those disparities. Because that's what Dr. King would expect. He would expect us to do this. But as we focus on that, my heart is torn apart by what happened on October 7th. I almost immediately went over, as soon as they said it was safe. I traveled October 17th, landing as President Biden was just leaving Israel. I knew I needed to go there as the proud representative of the largest Jewish population outside of Israel, because I had to bear witness so I could speak the truth, so I could come back and talk about what I saw with my own eyes. This morning I was at a rally outside the United Nations. Today is the 100th day that people have still been in captivity. We talk about oppressors, we talk about liberation, we talk about captivity, what happened to the Jews. We talk about the Old Testament, my teachings. There are still people in captivity right now, 8 of whom are Americans. One of whom is Omer Nutra, who lives on Long Island. He's one of our neighbors. I presented his photo to President Herzog when I visited him. I showed it to Prime Minister Netanyahu. I said, this is who I'm here for. And it is shocking to me that 100 days later, there are still people in captivity. So I said we must stand up. I said, where's the moral outrage about this? Why isn't this the lead story in the news every single day? And I'm going to tell you, we do mourn the loss of every single innocent civilian. We want no loss of life. But I want our hostages brought home because they deserve to have freedom and be home. Because they missed Thanksgiving, they missed Hanukkah, they missed the New Year, they missed being with their families. And no one in this day and age should have that loss, the families that are suffering today. Dr. King says, and it's in your program, the time is always right to do what's right. That's why, as the governor of the great state of New York, I will stand up. I will stand up for those who are oppressed. I'll stand up for black and brown communities until we live the dream that Dr. King spoke of. And I'll stand up for the Jewish community and say, I want to know where all the allies are. Where are the allies who should be with all of you today? The Jewish people stood shoulder to shoulder with Dr. King during the marches. Rabbi Heschel was there. Of the 3 people, the young college kids who went to the South during the Freedom Summer, 2 of those young men were Jewish. There have always been there. When there was a rise in Islamophobia after 9/11, all communities stood together and condemned it. When there's a rise in anti-Asian hate during the pandemic because of blame cast by the then president, people stood together. When there's been attacks on the LGBTQ community, people stood together. And after George Floyd, people stood together to condemn the violence against that man, said no more. Where are the allies today who should be standing side by side with the Jewish people against anti-Semitism? Where are they today? And I'm going to continue speaking out every single opportunity I have. I've condemned anti-Semitism on college campuses. In fact, in September, before October 7th, we had already seen a rise in anti-Semitism in our very state. And I asked the former chief judge of the Court of Appeals, Jonathan Lippman, a distinguished juror, I asked him to start investigating anti-Semitism in our public institutions like CUNY campuses. That was before October 7th. When the Jewish students at Cornell University were targeted by an individual who on social media, on a platform that showed he was on the campus because it was inside information, he said, follow Jewish students home from their classes and slit their throats. I found that out after I landed from burying my father, who had died when I was en route to Israel. Immediately the next day, I was with those students at Cornell, holding their hands, saying, I'll protect you, I'm your governor. And then within 24 hours, I said, we'll capture him. Within 24 hours, he was behind bars. We have to be strong, my friends. We cannot let any incident go unaddressed, unprosecuted, and call out those. And I want to have more voices speaking as one, condemning. Yes, we'll always condemn racism because it still lives with us today. We'll condemn Islamophobia because it does exist today. We'll condemn anti-Asian hate and homophobia. Yes, we'll do that, but I want people to stand together as one people, as Dr. King would have expected, to call out anti-Semitism. It's not that difficult. And as Dr. King has said, it is the right thing to do. So as you gather here tonight, inspired by the words of a man that walked this earth a long time ago, but whose influence is still felt, still present with us here today, let us all know that yes, that arc of the moral universe is long, but it doesn't bend toward justice by itself. It takes the people united together to bend it, and be united in that cause. And then, if we can band together during these difficult times and come out even stronger, which I know we can do, then we will be worthy of the name, the United States of America, because that's what Dr. King would have expected. Thank you very much.